Ukraine civil war front lines, mid-July to now. So, as you can see here, government's initial plan was to cut off Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics from the border with Russia, but the militia counterattacked around Soromagila and cut off the encircling 4 brigades here. The government then couldn't move forces from the north fast enough to relieve these guys, so they launched a general offensive with the aim of securing ground, making militia shift forces and getting some PR victories. They took Ilovaisk, militia retreated and basically continued to push militia back. Their next plan was to cut off just the DPR, the Donetsk People Republic, from Lugansk, so they started that in beginning of August. They've made a raid against Shakhtersk from here and basically kept attacking along this line against Shakhtersk, then against Torez and Snizhnoye to try to cut these guys off. They've also made some moves aimed at encircling Lugansk like that, but they didn't have enough forces. Meanwhile, the militia was just fighting delaying actions all around here and trying to digest this giant cauldron here. 400 men retreated into Russia here, the rest either surrendered or tried to break out. At the same time, the government was pushing out militia everywhere. So once it was clear the government couldn't cut off here, they've tried to use some of the forces trying to break out of this cauldron, as well as troops from here, to break the Donetsk-Lugansk highway at Krasny Luch here. So they've attacked like that, again trying to cut off DPR from the LPR, and that was their last best offensive, so to speak. They've made some serious gains and even entered Krasny Luch for a time. However, the southern cauldron got wiped out and the Lugansk things simmered down, and basically this offensive was limited to this area. However, it looked like it could be successful for a time. This is more or less the high water mark of the government efforts. They've made another strike here and attacked like that, but militia reinforcements came and with some very heavy fighting managed to hold these towns. It turned out that volunteers are better than conscripts, predictably, in town fighting. Then the next government plan, well, was obvious this wouldn't work, was to just cut off Lugansk like that and Donetsk like that, so just to cut off the cities themselves. And obviously, since with a lot of mechanized units they couldn't cut this highway and take some towns, they weren't going to advance very well in suburbs of large cities with large garrisons. And these forces trying to attack here were actually counterattacked and cut off and also encircled in the same move that happened before with these 5 brigades. So then the government offensive more or less petered out. The militia made some gains here, and towards the end of it, their offensive was basically limited to attacking Ilovaisk, which was fairly pointless. It was obvious this attack isn't going to work, so they were just moving on the south without a corresponding movement in the north. So the militia saw that the government more or less abandoned the border because they were getting encircled around the border all the time. So militia started seeping along the border, and eventually, when they were clear, they made a attack here and here, encircling basically most of the southern front line of the government and cutting off most of the forces here. In Lugansk also, the forces trying to encircle the city tried to attack, but because they were attacking from an encircled position, essentially, eventually their attack failed and they got broken up themselves. So as of now, the militia is basically making gains. They've made it to the Azov Sea coast. It turned out that past this front line, the government didn't have much forces at all. So they are basically running roughshod all around this area. So as you can see, the rebel forces poured through the breach here, and they've seen that there's very little opposition, so they tried to create a threat to Mariupol and force the government to keep forces there. At the same time, this encirclement by Volnovakha worked out well, and the forces that were supposed to relieve the previous encirclement were actually encircled themselves. The militia are also currently trying to create a threat to Debaltsevo, and as far as we know where they are succeeding, the government is retreating there. While Lugansk, the small encirclements are being destroyed, and this encirclement here is sitting without ammo or fuel. You can see this area is lightly shaded. That's because what the rebels have there are basically heavily armed scouts, but the government only has police. And here you can see the rebels took the Lugansk airport and attacking the Donetsk airport. The government is retreating.